Hey everybody, it's Dr. Osborne with Monday night's episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Welcome to the show. If this is your first time to be with us, some required homework and things that I would recommend that you do to take the most and walk away with the most is join our support community over at Facebook. Just join Dr. Osborne Support Community. Other things that you should do, if you haven't already, is sign up for our free newsletter at glutenfreesociety.org, where you can get access to tons of information about the gluten-free lifestyle and about healthy grain-free living and eating, including recipes, including research articles on a number of varying topics revolving around gluten sensitivity and autoimmune disease. So make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter. We'll also send you a gluten-free survival kit for doing that. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. That's Glutenology, youtube.com/Glutenology. So again, make sure you're taking advantage of all the information so that when you come to the live shows, you can formulate questions based on information you've already got a little bit of background knowledge on. It just makes your interaction so much better. So gluten and the skin. A lot of people will end up with different types of skin disorders or skin manifestations, oftentimes referred to by a lot of doctors as generalized dermatitis. Dermatitis means inflammation, derma referring to the skin. And there are a number of different forms of skin conditions and skin diseases, and that's where most people will go and visit a dermatologist, right? So we have, again, a number of different itises of the skin that manifest in a number of different ways. And then generally what happens, people go see their dermatitis and then they get a diagnosis. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going to a dermatologist and getting a diagnosis. The problem lies in causation, right? Getting a diagnosis. So I say this a lot to people. And so you may have heard me say this before, knowing what you have without knowing why you have it is basically futile information. Because if a doctor gives you a diagnosis but doesn't tell you why that disease exists or why that disease was caused, then what you're basically left with is holding your hands in the air saying, okay, I'm going to take this steroid or I'm going to take this antibiotic, because those are the two biggest drugs that come out of a dermatology office are antibiotics and steroids. And so those are the two predominant forms of treatment that get used in skin disorders. So I'm not saying there aren't any other medications that get used, but those are the two big ones. And neither one of those medications actually solve the problem. You don't solve skin disease by taking a steroid to suppress inflammation, because the inflammation is still being caused by something. The steroid is just suppressing it. And if you use the steroid long-term enough, what ultimately can happen is it will, one, on the skin, it thins the skin, but systemically steroids cause bone loss. They also cause muscle atrophy. Corticosteroids cause muscle atrophy. That's right. That means it slows down your metabolic rate and makes you more predisposed to muscle loss and weight gain. And that's not a good long-term side effect. It's not something that solves the inflammation, and it's definitely not a side effect that you want to have following you around. And then the antibiotic is the other one, and that, again, many infections on the skin, if they are bacterial and they are life-threatening, antibiotic, by all means, take it. It'll save your life potentially, but a lot of times doctors will look at the skin, assume it's something infectious, but not really do a culture and just give the antibiotic. And then now you're stuck with this antibiotic that may or may not be the solution for your problem. And the potential side effects, the long-term side effects of using that antibiotic, which can be potentially dangerous and potentially a threat to you, because it only takes one dose of antibiotics to change your microbiome for up to 2 years. And that's been very, very well studied. So we don't just want to blatantly throw steroids and antibiotics at skin problems unless we know what the skin problem is being created from. So let's go through the list of some of the most common types of skin issues, and let's talk about what they are and how gluten or other things might be related to these as well. Let's see here. We got some more of you chiming in here. And by the way, if you have questions, put them in now, because it's always, as always, on Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain, it's first come, first serve. I answer as many as I can within the time that we have allotted for this evening. But beyond that, I have to call it quits at some point. So make sure if you've got questions, go ahead and get typing them in now. Some of you are doing that now. So we've got Patrick from Madison, Wisconsin, and Tasha from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and Joan and Dawn from the UK. and Christy Olson chiming in, and Susan from Wenatchee. Sorry, I mangled that one, Susan. Washington. So, okay. Anyway, again, type in your questions now as you have them, and I'll do my best to get to them. So let's talk skin disorders. Let's talk some of the big ones linked to gluten sensitivity. So the number one, I've got to put it up there simply because it's kind of one of those. And here we go. Dermatitis herpetiformis. Dermatitis herpetiformis is really, it's the skin manifestation of celiac disease. So if you have been diagnosed with DH, oftentimes abbreviated DH, dermatitis herpetiformis, you have celiac disease. Those two go hand in hand. Now, not everybody with gluten sensitivity will develop celiac disease or dermatitis herpetiformis. However, this is one that if you have it, you have celiac disease, and obviously it's a problem. So dermatitis herpetiformis is little blister-like lesions that pop up on the skin. It actually, the reason it's called dermatitis herpetiformis is because it kind of looks like little herpes blisters. So if you've got what looks to be or appears to be little herpes blisters, you definitely want to get that checked out. If you don't even know about gluten or celiac disease, but you've got these types of rashes or blisters that are coming up on you, go get that checked out, because if you've got DH, all it takes is going gluten-free. Gluten-free can solve this problem in a few weeks. So literally, it can be an amazing turnaround in cases of dermatitis herpetiformis. And this is one of those, it's a smoking gun. If you have DH, you are gluten sensitive, period. End of story. It's not a disease association. It's causal. Gluten causes dermatitis herpetiformis. So that's one that you definitely want to keep in mind. Again, it looks like little tiny herpes blisters on the skin. Usually it comes in clusters. And so if you've got that, you want to make sure that you get that checked out. Now, that being said, everybody's entitled to more than one problem. And sometimes what will happen is people will have multiple types of skin lesions, and the doctors won't ever put two and two together in terms of both of these skin lesions can both be caused by gluten. And a perfect example here would be somebody who has eczema. Eczema is another skin lesion that we'll commonly see in people who also have dermatitis herpetiformis. So you can have more than one skin condition at the same time. And again, eczema is one of those. It's commonly caused by gluten. Now, what's tricky about eczema is it's not always just gluten. In essence, other things can also cause eczematic outbreaks as well. Dairy is a big one. Sugar is a big one with eczema. Any other food allergies, we'll see people reacting to different foods in different ways, but many people have skin manifestations and in the form of eczema from food allergies as well. So eczema is another big one that you want to look out for. If you've got eczema, if you've been diagnosed with eczema and you have not properly been genetically tested for gluten sensitivity, keyword here, genetic testing, because if you haven't been genetic tested, then you haven't been properly tested. Because if you haven't been genetic tested, you've probably been tested for celiac disease, but not been tested for gluten sensitivity. Remember, there is a distinct difference. Genetic testing is the only accurate way to really ascertain whether or not you need to be on a gluten-free diet. So I'm going to throw up, for those of you who've not heard of that before, again, knowledge is power. Go get educated. I'm putting a link for you to learn a little bit more about genetic testing for gluten sensitivity so you can have that and take appropriate action on it. So eczema is another real common manifestation. Another one, a little bit less common, but this is actually an autoimmune disease, and it's also sometimes linked to a form of arthritis, and it is called psoriasis. Sometimes referred, well, they're not exactly the same, but many people with psoriatic arthritis, or just psoriasis is the skin manifestation of the inflammation of the autoimmune condition. So some people will get a diagnosis of psoriasis. Some people will get a diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis. And again, a lot of times doctors don't tell you that these can be caused by gluten sensitivity, meaning not that everyone with gluten sensitivity will develop them, but many people with gluten sensitivity, the way that the inflammation manifests for them is to form lesions on the skin, psoriatic plaques on the skin. And for some of these people, for a percentage, they also develop arthritis in their joints. So it's a kind of a combination disease where you can have the arthritis in the joints. You can also have the lesions on the skin. And again, it is linked to gluten sensitivity. I have seen cases in my practice where people have come in with their head to toe psoriasis all over, embarrassing, depressed, because look, it can be a very devastating disease, especially if it's affecting the face and the hands and other people can see it. It makes the person who has psoriasis very antisocial. It makes them embarrassed and makes them want to go and hide. I mean, it's a devastating skin condition. So if you've had that diagnosis and you're not following through with your doc and trying to determine whether or not you have a gluten sensitivity, that would be the number one thing I would tell you. Go and get a genetic test for gluten sensitivity and see if that's one of the potential reasons why that condition is basically affecting you. So again, very, very common skin manifestation, psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis. Now, another one, very, very common, and oftentimes this one's not really referred to as a skin condition, but fever blisters around the oral cavity. And we'll see these on the lips as aphthous ulcers. And these also look like little herpes lesions, like little herpes blisters. So think of it as almost similar to dermatitis herpetiformis, but in the mouth or around the oral cavity. And again, these fever blisters, there are some researchers that have found that this is the #1 predictive symptom associated with gluten sensitivity, meaning more people with gluten sensitivity have fever blisters than any other potential symptom. Now, that hasn't been my experience as far as the clinic is concerned. It hasn't been my experience, but some researchers out there do have that experience. I think it just depends on what kind of practice the doctors or the researchers have. But fever blisters are a very, very common manifestation, as are aphthous ulcers. So if you struggle with fever blisters repetitively, some people have been told their fever blisters are viral, and that can be true, but don't let somebody guess that. Don't let a doctor say, oh, it's just viral, it'll go away and it'll just come back and go away and come back and go away. Don't take that as an answer, right? Go get tested, because if it's not viral and it's diet related, those things can go away. And I've had patients who've had them for their entire life, for decades and decades, who once they took gluten out of their diet, went away and they never came back. Or if they did come back, it was one of their tells. If they got gluten cross-contamination, they would break out in fever blisters as their tell, as the way they knew they were getting that cross-contamination. So again, fever blisters, very, very common manifestation of gluten. So again, don't just let that be virus and then walk away thinking it's just a virus and there's nothing you can do about it, because that's not 100% true. Now, another symptom, this is one quite common, and let me give you a little bit of a nuance here, because it's not hives. Hives are not necessarily an outcome of gluten sensitivity, at least not in my experience, but they're really more of an outcome of a direct allergic response. And the two most common that I see happen to be wheat and corn. Now, some would say, who cares? I'm gluten-free. Wheat and corn, we're taking those out anyway. But I like to be specific, right? So gluten sensitivity, I haven't seen cause a lot of hives, but acute allergies to wheat and corn, definitely I've seen people have hive outbreaks in a very, very big way. So again, hives can be a super, super common manifestation of an allergy, an acute allergy to wheat or corn. And the problem with that is a lot of your lotions contain wheat germ. A lot of your hair care products and skin-based products contain corn-based ingredients. So where we'll see this happen a lot is people think they're allergic to something in their lotion, in their shampoo, or in their hygiene product. And they are, right, because they're breaking out in hives when they use it. But a lot of people don't make the connection between the wheat and the corn. So again, you want to make sure that you understand that can absolutely be one of those symptoms that can manifest as a result of exposure. Additionally, another skin condition that we really see, and this is maybe not a skin condition in terms of what a lot of people would say is a disease, bright but itchy skin. And let me define that, or let me explain that. A lot of people that have gluten sensitivity have gallbladder problems, meaning gluten can cause damage to the liver, which disrupts gallbladder flow and gallbladder function. So the gallbladder itself can start to form or precipitate out stones, and that can lead to a clogging of the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is trying to secrete bile, and that bile backs up and it can't be secreted. And so we've got this major problem with what a lot of doctors will call this cholelithiasis, which is gallstones. But you don't have to have stones. You can have sludge. Basically, it's not stones per se, because if they do an image and they can't find any stones, it doesn't mean you don't have thick bile that's hard to secrete, hard to push out. Well, this can manifest when you have bile blockage. This can manifest as severe itching of the skin. And this is one of the symptoms a lot of people have. They don't have, the major liver disease. Their lab tests are showing up normal, but their skin is just itching all the time, constantly itching. This, again, can be bile backflow, and gluten is notorious for creating cholecystitis. Cholecystitis is just the medical terminology for an inflamed gallbladder. So the symptom of one of the symptoms of an inflamed gallbladder is itchy skin. So if you've got itchy skin, you don't know why, you've tried everything, again, it very well could be gluten inducing a gallbladder blockage or a gallbladder suppression. And that in and of itself can be one of those issues. And this is why a lot of people, we've polled people online through a gluten quiz. We've done over 1 million gluten-free quizzes at this point in different people across the world. And one of the top symptoms that we get back on our quiz is people have had gallbladder surgery. They've had their gallbladder removed, and that before they were identified as gluten sensitive. And that was actually one of the symptoms associated with their gluten sensitivity. So again, if your skin itches and if you've been told you have a sluggish gallbladder and you just need to get it removed, before having it removed, you might have a different conversation with your doctor about testing you, again, genetic testing for gluten sensitivity. Make sure that just a diet change may not just resolve that issue altogether. I've seen that be the case. We've saved a lot of gallbladders over the years just by changing diet. It's not an impossibility, and it's actually a pretty common thing that can be changed. So don't let that advice be the thing that gets you in a surgical room right away, unless it's an emergency acute scenario where you've got an infection in your gallbladder and you're going to die, right? And that's not really one of those things. It's typical. So one of the other symptoms that we'll see associated with the skin, and again, I'm giving you some that are skin diseases because they're related to the skin, and that is hair growth on the skin. There's actually an autoimmune condition referred to as alopecia, and there are different forms of alopecia. There's alopecia areata, which is when you develop an autoimmune disease of the follicles in your skin that grow hair. And so you'll get little ring-like patches, just little ring-like patches of hair loss. It's very common that it happens on the head because it's where you have the most hair and where you recognize it. But people will actually have ring-like patches of hair loss or circular-like losses, patches of hair loss that can be caused as a result of gluten exposure. That's called alopecia areata. There's also another one called alopecia totalis or universalis, which is hair loss, complete hair loss from head to toe, meaning all the hair follicles in your body are under an autoimmune attack and they're being destroyed and you don't grow hair anymore. But where I see alopecia commonly in people with gluten sensitivity is, again, the scalp, the hair on the scalp, as well as in the legs. We'll see hair loss starting in the lower extremity, and it'll kind of work its way up. I'll see smooth skin, particularly in males. It's harder to detect in females because they most shave their legs in the United States. But in males, we'll see who don't shave their legs, or unless they're bodybuilders, right? They have hair loss from about their ankle up to about the mid-calf. So that hair loss begins in the lower leg, and it becomes more and more apparent as it creeps its way up. So those are forms of alopecia that can be induced by autoimmunity. Again, that can be caused by gluten sensitivity. I've seen cases of massive chunks of hair loss coming out in females where, look, a matter of a 2 or 3 or 4 month diet change completely led to regrowth of those nummular patches of hair loss. So if you've been diagnosed with alopecia areata and they're injecting steroids in your head, or they're wanting you to take drugs that help for hair growth like Rogaine, Look, the reality is go get checked for gluten sensitivity, because it's a very, very common connection and very, very few people talk about it or put it together. So very, very important to get that checked out if you have ever been diagnosed with alopecia of an autoimmune nature. Now, another one that is very, very strongly linked, and this will be the last one I talk about tonight, is vitiligo. Vitiligo is, if you've ever, a lot of people talk about Michael Jackson, how his skin got lighter and lighter and lighter. This is actually called vitiligo. It's when the skin pigment, the cells that produce the pigment for your skin are destroyed. It's an autoimmune process as well, and it's been directly linked to gluten sensitivity. Now, again, there are all these conditions I'm talking about. I'm not trying to say that every single one of these, gluten is the only cause or the only reason why these conditions can develop. It's just that it is a major, major player in all of them. And if you have them and the doctor's just trying to throw medicine at it, you don't know why. Again, you want to get gluten sensitivity ruled out, because it could very well be as simple as a diet change. But in the case of vitiligo, very, very common. I've seen cases, aggressive vitiligo that was progressing across the face, across the arms, across the body. And many times you can halt the progression of vitiligo. And in some cases, you can repigment. You can actually, through diet change, you can see repigmentation occurring, meaning the pigment comes back. Some doctors will tell you no pigmentation will ever come back. It's impossible. I've seen just the opposite of that. I've seen people regain their pigment when they change their diet. Now, it doesn't happen for everybody, and a lot of times it's because there are other factors in vitiligo. But again, I said gluten sensitivity is not the only reason or the only trigger. In my experience, vitiligo, there are three big triggers. One is gluten, another one is vitamin B12 deficiency, and another one of them is folate deficiency. So B12, folate, as well as gluten sensitivity are three big triggers associated with vitiligo. So again, those are the big ones. Those are the big skin disorders that if you've been diagnosed with any of them, if you've been told, hey, you've got this condition here, we're just going to medicate it and we're not really going to ask any questions about why it's there, then you need to have gluten sensitivity checked out. I left one out? I think I did. I left out acne, and I think I should bring that one up, because so many people struggle with acne, especially adult onset acne. Can also be quite debilitating, and we'll see cases where there's severe acne, meaning enough to create scarring, and especially in cases where there's a type of acne called cystic acne, highly related to gluten sensitivity. It's a form of inflammation, and again, going gluten-free oftentimes is enough to clear up a number of cases of acne. I've even seen it in teenagers who were told, no, you just need to go on Accutane, which is a synthetic vitamin A drug that can damage the liver for years. Instead of changing their diet, they're just prescribing that medication, which, again, it's not something that I would recommend for any of my own children. And it's not something I typically recommend for any of my clients who come in to see me. So if you struggle with acne and again, you haven't tried to change your diet to see if that acne will clear up, highly recommend that you look for gluten sensitivity as a reason. Also, sugar. Sugar is a big trigger for acne. Now, I know every dermatologist you may have spoken to before this will all tell you how acne has nothing to do with diet, but the reality is that healthy skin starts from the inside. You build skin. Skin is an organ, and it's a very, very important organ. And I think maybe we should now have that conversation about the importance of skin. What is skin? Skin is basically, it's a form of epithelial tissue that coats our body, and it has so many different functions. There are kinesthetic receptors in our skin that detect our position in space. They detect cold and temperature, and they detect frequencies. And so this is why skin is such an important organ. But one of the other big functions of the skin is that it is an immune organ. It is our first line of defense. It's an immune barrier, right? If we didn't have any skin, we'd pick up every infection in the world and we'd die of anaphylactic shock from infection or sepsis. And we just wouldn't be around very long. This is why people that have big strips of their skin removed, like burn victims, for example, this is why the greatest risk in the hospital for those people is infection. That's why the IV antibiotic burn victims who've had large chunks of their skin removed through fire. So again, skin is a very, very important part of your immune system. It secretes immune proteins, it secretes oils, it secretes a number of factors. It produces a cholesterol that helps us make vitamin D. And again, any of these diseases could potentially impact or affect the way the skin is capable of doing its job. And so if you allow your skin to be inflamed because you have a poor diet, then again, that's going to show up later down the road, the longer it's there, in other ways. It's going to affect your immune system. It's going to affect how your skin is designed to protect you. So you want to make sure that if you want healthy skin, right? And some people say if you want glowing skin or healthy skin, look, I'm really about healthy skin, glowing and, all these other terms that a lot of people will use, especially in like the aesthetic industry. Look, it's more important that you have healthy skin, because if your skin is healthy, it will glow. So don't go for products. My point is this: don't buy products that are creams or gels or lotions that are designed to, in essence, maybe not treat, but mask your skin disease. Figure out why you have the skin disease. And if you want to use other healthy organic products for your skin to moisturize your skin and do things with your skin, that's fine. But don't use them as a crutch to cover up stuff. Don't use them as a crutch to cover up inflammatory problems. Don't use cosmetics as a way to cover up the underlying issue. Find out what the underlying issue is and address it so that you're no longer needing to use those other cover-ups. And again, if you want to use a natural organic product, one of my favorite brands is Anne Marie Gianni. I think we just sent an email out about that. They were doing a big sale for all of our email subscribers. But if you want to use a healthy organic product, you can. But again, you should never use a healthy organic product to cover up a problem unless you figured out where that problem is coming from first. So, okay, questions are pouring in here. So let's see if we can't get those answered this evening. Okay, let's see. Okay. Oh, I'm glad this one came in. So Reg Carlos is asking, is Raynaud's disease related to gluten sensitivity? Yes. So this is another, it's technically not a skin disease, but you can see it in the skin. And that is, Raynaud's is that triphasic color change of the fingertips, typically the fingers and hands, where we'll get the color changing pattern of red, white, and blue. Skin tone changes are happening, and this is actually a vast neurovascular disease that is autoimmune in nature. And yes, there are links to gluten sensitivity and Raynaud's phenomenon. So again, if you struggle with Raynaud, there's just one more on the list of potential possibilities. Shannon from Spanaway, Washington. Good evening, Shannon. Let's see. Oh, so here's one. Hetty's just chiming in. I get canker sores inside my cheeks when glutened. I use my electric toothbrush and brush the inside of my mouth out. Okay, that's good. Yeah, get the gluten out. If you get accidental gluten exposure, you definitely want to clean out and detox. Let's see here. Several of you, just Marianne is saying it. Donna is saying it. Just chiming in about fever blisters. Joan is saying it. Yeah, so here's perfect. I had rough skin, sort of like clear sand, and a rash on the upper arm, like those fever blisters too. Not since I cut out gluten. I had genetic test, gluten sensitive. Thank you. Joan, thank you, and you're welcome. Thank you for sharing that story with the audience, because there's people listening that, a lot of people are skeptical and they're quick to dismiss a diet change as an important component of being healthy. And your story might help to have some of them see the light. Next one, Kate is asking about urticaria. Yes, urticaria can also be a symptom. We just didn't talk about it. So to answer your question, absolutely. So Rosemary is asking, Annoy, understand you say corn and grains are bad for celiacs. What if it's gluten-free and organic? Rosemary, this is the perfect example of why I want you to read No Grain, No Pain, because there's no such thing as gluten-free corn. There's only such thing as gluten-free corn as labeled per FDA guidelines and laws, meaning in the United States and in other countries, gluten is defined as wheat, barley, and rye. Particularly, it's defined as alpha-gliadin, a very, very special type of gluten protein only found in wheat, barley, and rye. And that's why food labeling laws get away with calling corn gluten-free. Corn has a type of gluten in it called zein, and it is second highest in gluten concentration than any other grain except wheat. And studies have shown that people with gluten sensitivity gene patterns react to corn more aggressively than they act to wheat gluten. So, when I say don't eat corn, it's not because it's me just saying that trying to restrict somebody's diet further. It's because that's what the research shows us, and that's what the clinical outcomes show us. So it doesn't matter if corn is gluten-free, the same as it doesn't matter if wheat is gluten-free, organic. You can call corn organic, or you can eat organic corn or eat organic wheat, but that doesn't mean it's gluten-free. It's still going to contain gluten, and it's still going to create that inflammatory response. So I'm glad you asked. Thanks for tuning in, and get your copy of No Grain, No Pain. You can pick it up on Amazon or any major book outlet. Let's see here. Yeah, so another one, and they promote oats as a body scrub, says Lynn. You're absolutely right. You think of oats. There's a whole company that uses oat as its predominant ingredient, like, Aveeno, which Aveeno or Avenin is the name of the gluten found in oats. The Avenin is a gluten, but they can use it on products and in products and call it gluten-free by law. So again, it's just one of those areas where people are confused. They don't understand gluten terminology, and they don't understand gluten science, which they shouldn't have to. The doctors should be better positioning them to understand it. And of course, the food manufacturers and the labeling laws should be better positioned to protect end users or end consumers. Okay. Kate's asking, is acid reflux linked to celiac? Absolutely. There's a particular type of acid reflux called Barrett's esophagitis that occurs and causes such severe inflammation of the esophagus that the risk for that is actually development of cancer, and there are direct links with that and celiac, as well as gluten sensitivity, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Let's see here. Susan, you've talked some about this before, but hoping for more info on it. Muscle and bone wasting is a big problem. Throw in weak connective tissue, and it's an even bigger problem. What is the best process to turn it around? Boy, that's a big question, Susan. How do you put it all together? The best way to put it all together is work with somebody. Work with somebody directly. Don't go it alone, because that's a lot. You're coping with a lot of different things, and that requires some monitoring, that requires some management, that requires some investigation and some ongoing objective investigation. Just as a perfect example, one of the bullets that you put in there were supplements. Supplements are important, especially if you have nutritional deficiencies. They can be important for helping you turn it around, but throwing supplements at a guess without actually doing the proper testing to see what it is your body needs, that's just one example of all those different bullets that you listed that needs to be objectively monitored so that you're not missing the mark. Because I see people all the time, they bring in suitcases, and the suitcases, got 100 pill bottles in it, and they're taking all of them, but they don't know why they're taking them. They're just taking them because they read somewhere that it's good for them, or they read somewhere that it helps support healthy skin or healthy bones or healthy joints or whatever, but they didn't necessarily need it. And that's what I would say I would encourage many of you who are just taking that bulk quantity of supplements. You really want to get objective about it, because you may not need all those things. But that's a bit. Maybe we'll just have to do a special show on musculoskeletal problems. Maybe we'll do that here, and that might be helpful for you, Susan. Let's see here. So a lot of you chiming in, I guess this was after I was talking about itchy skin. A lot of you were chiming in that, yes, that was one of your experiences, or that was one of your symptoms as well. Marianne is saying that, and Becky is chiming in and saying that as well. Yeah, Rosemary, yes, that's exactly what it means. It means don't eat gluten-free pasta that's made out of corn, rice, sorghum, millet, teff, triticale, wheat, barley, rye, oats. Even if the package says gluten-free, don't eat it because it's not gluten-free. There's no such thing as gluten-free grain. Go read, quit getting confused. Go read No Grain, No Pain. Go pick your copy up tonight, go read it, and you'll stop being confused. Any of you who are listening tonight, if you've read No Grain, No Pain and it changed your life, let Rosemary know that so that it prompts her to go do the right thing there, because it sounds like she's struggling and she just needs some confirmation and help. Okay, let's see here. Oh, good. A lot of you are doing that. A lot of you are having a conversation. It looks like a lot of you are having a conversation with Rosemary. That's great. Great. Interact with each other, because that's part of why we have these meetings as well. Let's see here. Next question. Okay, we got Cheryl Lee from California. Sylvia, idiopathic angioedema, is that related to gluten sensitivity? Is angioedema related to gluten sensitivity? Yes, it can be, but the very term idiopathic is by definition means we don't know what causes it. But however, there are cases of angioedema that definitely are linked to gluten sensitivity, in which case it would no longer be idiopathic. So because if you cut the gluten out and it goes away, then it's no longer idiopathic. You know what caused it, right? So Sylvia, my advice, get checked out for gluten sensitivity, and if it helps your idiopathic angioedema, then we can quit calling it idiopathic and we can start calling it gluten-induced. Is stevia in the raw okay? Check your ingredients on that one, Denise. Some stevias, and I don't know about that particular brand off the top of my head, but a lot of stevias contain maltodextrin and other fillers that can be corn-derived. So you want to be real careful with the brand that you use, and just make sure it's pure stevia. Lily's asking, do we need gluten? My mom heard we need some gluten. I don't know where she heard that, Lily, but no, we don't need gluten. Gluten is not an essential nutrient. It's not a nutrient required for any human to maintain their sustenance or to maintain their nutritional health. So no, the answer is we do not need gluten. There are some people that are out there saying that whole grains are important for health, and if you cut whole grains out, you'll cut out certain vitamins and minerals, and that's not really true either. And there's no research that really supports that. So, maybe that's what your mom was referring to. I'm not sure, but no, humans do not need gluten in their diet. So Natalia, I gotta be honest, celiac already forces me to cut so much out of my diet at 21. It's hard enough to live like a normal college kid when it comes to food. What few affordable grains I can eat, I'm just reluctant to eliminate it. It feels unnecessarily restrictive. Well, Natalia, nobody here is trying to force you into doing anything you don't want to do. For those that are ready to go grain-free, generally what that means, they have to be sick enough to be able to want to make the changes, because the illness outweighs, the detriment of the illness outweighs the pain and the social trauma that they might feel from the diet change. So look, the reality is if you're celiac and you're eating other grains, the average celiac goes on to develop 7 more forms of autoimmune disease in their lifetime. And I would just hate to see that fate thrust upon you with the next, several decades of your life. So all I can do is just say, look, get educated. And, I would encourage you also to read No Grain, No Pain, get educated so that you can at least make the decisions based on a healthy science sound, as opposed to a popular fad diet where people are throwing junk food at celiacs left and right. Processed genetically modified grain is not healthy food and is not going to help your gut heal, regardless of whether you wanted to cut out other grains. So anyway, I hope that's helpful for you. Interesting. So Denise is chiming in. All good from Gretna, Nebraska, and did a gluten diet for a GI doctor to test me for celiac. He says I'm not celiac, but my skin developed acne, so I am pretty sure I am gluten sensitive, intolerant, even though not celiac. Is that what my breakouts mean for the 3 months that I ate gluten? It very well could be, Denise. Extraintestinal skin manifestations is one of the predominant ways people will react to gluten. So again, remember that everyone with celiac disease is gluten sensitive, but not everybody with gluten sensitivity will develop celiac disease. And so it's an important delineation. It's something that you definitely want to understand, because otherwise, you can be told you're not celiac, and you can be told to eat all the gluten that you want. And if you do, you can continue to have problems as you experienced. It sounds like you experienced some pretty severe skin issues. For those of you who don't know, who haven't been tested, haven't been genetic tested, if you want to get a quick idea of whether you might need to think about genetic testing, I'm going to put a link up here to a gluten quiz you can take. It's a free quiz. It's a self-test. And I just put that into the feed. And go take that test. And if it comes back positive and you have a high suspicion of gluten sensitivity, then now you want to maybe consider genetic testing and then taking your diet gluten-free. Now, many people will go gluten-free and say, I don't need a test. I just going to do an elimination diet. And the problem with doing an elimination diet is you may not be gluten sensitive. A lot of people avoid grain and they feel better, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have a gluten sensitivity. You could be avoiding what else is in grain. Remember what else grain contains. Grain contains proteins in it that are non-gluten proteins that we know can cause inflammation. Proteins like serpinins and purinins and amylase trypsin inhibitors. These have all been really well studied as activating inflammation in the GI tract, and they have nothing to do with gluten. Grains also contain heavy levels of molds and mycotoxins. They contain high levels of omega-6 fatty acids, which can increase your inflammatory response. So there are other ingredients within grain that are not gluten that could be the culprit. And this is why I'm a big fan of objectivity of testing, because if you test and then you can commit to the diet, because committing to the diet doesn't mean for 2 months or 3 months or 8 months. It means indefinite. It means permanent. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so Yvonne is saying, I had acid reflux caused by wheat for 10 years before I knew I was gluten intolerant. Thanks for sharing that, Yvonne, because I think there was a question about that earlier. So I've heard some doctors say not all gluten is bad, but only bad gluten is bad, referring to wheat, rye, and barley. So we should avoid all grains. And that's my advice, Christy, because understand, again, if you're gluten sensitive. So the clear caveat here is if you're gluten sensitive. That's why I recommend getting tested. If you haven't been tested and you don't know whether going gluten-free is even the right move for you, then you may not need to go that far. But if you are genetically gluten sensitive and you're eating glutens, period, doesn't matter whether it's from rice or corn or other forms of grain, you're going to react to that. You're going to have an inflammatory response. And that's been shown repetitively in medical science and medical research. It's also been shown repetitively in my clinic and many other clinicians' offices across the globe. So to answer your question in a simple way, yeah, that's what that means. Let's see here. Jana, my son has ulcerative colitis and has tried all the most common autoimmune drugs, but nothing has helped. Any idea what diet will help? No grain, no pain. I'll say it again. If I haven't said it enough in the last 48 minutes, Jana, it's no grain, no pain. Go buy the book, chapter 7 and chapter 8. Have your son follow that diet try it for 38 days, or for not 38, but for 30 days. And if he's feeling better and doing better, you'll have some answers. But ultimately, you want to know what's creating the ulcerative colitis. The biggest triggers I've seen for ulcerative colitis being triggered, one is dairy, one is sugar, and one is grain. So those are 3 big triggers. If he hasn't changed his diet, no drug in the world is going to help suppress the quantity of inflammation caused by diet. Remember, the GI tract is inflamed. The large intestine's inflamed because of what he's putting in his mouth, not because he's got a deficiency in autoimmune drugs. It's because of what he's putting in his mouth. So you really have to dial back and see what is contributing to that ulcerative colitis for your son. Now, other reasons ulcerative colitis happens for a lot of people is infection. So your son might also have an infection that has gone undetected. So that would be another avenue that you could investigate. Okay, let's see here. What about dermatomyositis? Yeah, dermatomyositis is absolutely, this is one, it's kind of a hybrid. It's a disease that affects the muscles, but it also affects the skin. And so from that perspective, Can gluten cause dermatomyositis? Yes, I've seen that be the case. Directly causal, 1-to-1, meaning person was gluten sensitive, removing gluten from the diet, meaning all grain from the diet, watching dermatomyositis, both the lesions on the skin as well as the muscle pain and inflammation completely resolve. So yes, the two do go hand in hand. Let's see here. Lisa, if I have eczema, should I stay away from Aveeno products that claim to be for alleviating eczema? Yes, that is what I would recommend if you have eczema. But first and foremost, the takeaway from tonight, if you guys have heard me, is get tested. Whether you take that quiz that I put up and kind of get an idea for whether or not going gluten-free is the right move for you, or whether you do proper genetic testing, get tested so that you know, because it's hard for me to guess at everybody. Because remember, there are multiple things that can cause eczema. Gluten is just one of them. Let's see. Oh, Bridget from South Carolina. Hi. Welcome tonight. Or Bridget. Michelle, if you're not having symptoms from other grains, why should you stop eating them? Great question, and thank you for asking it. So a lot of people don't. Let me preface that by simply saying, first of all, if you're gluten sensitive, you should stop eating grains. Okay, again, this is where testing becomes important. The average patient with celiac disease will not get a diagnosis for up to 3 decades, meaning their disease is there's a name for it. It's called silent celiac disease, meaning the damage goes on and on and on and on until the body breaks down to the point where disease develops. Remember that all diseases are nothing more than loss of adaptation. It's a loss of your body's ability to adapt to the damage that's being created from what you're doing or what the environment is doing. So if you are silent in your symptoms, but you know you're gluten sensitive, you should be avoiding all grains from the perspective of prevention, because if you're gluten sensitive genetically, when you eat that gluten, you will have an inflammatory response. However, some people are in general good health and their body has a great capacity and resiliency to deal with and cope with the inflammation. And so they tend to be relatively asymptomatic until they're not, until the floodgates break open, until the proverbial straw breaks the camel's back, and then the diseases start to come. So I hope that answers your question. It's not me just trying to convince you to not eat grain. I'm a big advocate of testing. I'm not saying everybody in the world needs to be grain-free, even though that's what I'm largely known for. I'm simply saying that if you're gluten sensitive through proper testing and you're eating other grains, then you're probably going to end up, statistics say, you're going to end up with up to 7 autoimmune diseases in your lifetime. And I don't wish that on anyone. And that's one of those types of fates that a lot of people don't even realize is associated with gluten. Maja is saying, I'm on a gluten-free diet, but still have acne issues. Any idea why? Lots of reasons why. You could have nutritional deficits. One of the common causes of acne or contributors to acne is omega-3 fatty acid deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, zinc deficiency. So, you would want to definitely look into your nutritional status and see that you have the right nutrients, the vitamins and minerals for your skin to properly repair and heal itself. That would be where I would start. Let's see here. So here's confirmation from someone. Elizabeth saying, yes, once I had one autoimmune disease, the other diagnoses just started piling up. Thankful for stopping the merry-go-round. Eat real organic food. Thank you for Monday school. Hey, I like that, Monday school. Thanks for that idea, Elizabeth. Let's see here. If a mother is gluten sensitive, would the baby be too? Possibly. It's genetic. So part of how you detect that, so there's 2 different genes that we look for. There's 4 different genetic alleles. So 2 genes, 4 different pieces. If mother has 4 positive alleles for gluten sensitivity, then the baby will be. But if mother only has 2, then the baby may not be. So it's not always 100%. And this, again, is one of the reasons why I love testing, because testing takes away guessing. So many people guess at the diet They do well, they don't do well. And a lot of the reasons they don't do well is because they guess and they don't commit. It's a 12-week learning curve, guys and gals. This you don't just go gluten-free and tomorrow you're perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to find it in your cosmetics. You're going to find it in your hair care products. You're going to find it in your toothpaste. You're going to find it at your favorite restaurant. You're going to find that, you know, your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend might be eating a wheat sandwich and kissing you and giving you cross-contamination. There's all different kinds of possibilities here. I even had one time I had somebody that came to see me. They were getting cross-contamination because they shared air ducts with a bakery next door. So all that wheat dust was being pumped into the air and they were breathing it in all day. So, you know, again, testing is critical because it takes away the guesswork. And when the guesswork is gone, you don't have to worry about whether you're doing the right thing. Let's see here. Sandy from Northern Wisconsin. Hi, Sandy. Welcome to the show. Let's see. Any other questions here? Thoughts on dry brushing for the skin? You can. Dry brushing is fine. It's helpful. It can be helpful, but it isn't a solution. It's what we call an adjunctive therapy, and meaning it's something that you do to help support the big game changers. What are the big game changers? The big game changers are your behavior, your diet, your exercise, your sunshine, your sleep, your clean air, your clean water quality, and your capacity, your spiritual capacity, and your relationships. Those are all the big game changers that you really want to investigate. Things like dry brushing and massage and other therapies. And that's not, I'm not picking on dry brushing or massage. I love massage. I get one every week because there's a value to it. But my point is that they're passive therapies. They're not going to be the thing that fixes the problem. You've got to change your diet, your behavior. Those are the big players. The other things are adjunctive to what you can do on top of that. Is fibromyalgia related to gluten? Absolutely, without a doubt, 100%. My doctor says that the wheat and yeast allergy means that I'm allergic to gluten. Is that correct without genetic testing? No, that's not correct at all. And it depends on the type of testing that he did. If he tested you for allergy, did he test you for IgE, IgA, IgG, IgM, IgD? Did he test you for immune complex or T cell response? You know, there are different ways to test for allergies, and most doctors don't do a very thorough job of testing all the different allergen pathways. So that's not at all what that means. If you tested positive for yeast and wheat, it doesn't mean you're gluten sensitive. You need to be genetic tested if you want to get that answer. Let's see here. Why is milk bad for people with celiac disease? Thanks for asking that, Kim. And I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because we just did a show like 3 weeks ago, and it's the most detailed show you'll ever come across on this very topic. Again, if you subscribe to our feed on glutenfreesociety.org and to our YouTube channel, you'll get updates on all this. But I'm gonna, because you asked the question, I'm just gonna post this up in the feed for you, and you can go and check it out. But definitely go and check it out because that's a long conversation and a long answer. So again, I think, Michelle, I think this is the same question I might have answered a minute ago. So if you have celiac disease, but no symptoms after eating grains like corn and rice, it doesn't mean that they're not creating, again, a silent inflammatory epidemic that's building internally. And that's where, that's where I would fear for you. That's where I would say you need to be cautious and you need to rethink that. That would just be my opinion. Take it for what you will, but that's my opinion on the matter. And I can tell you, if you're celiac, you're gluten sensitive. And if you're gluten sensitive, you're reacting to corn. Science has shown that repetitively over and over and over again. And we've seen it in repeat biopsy studies, and we've seen it in a number of patients. And that's one of the reasons why people with celiac disease go on to develop multiple autoimmune diseases. The problem is when they go on to develop those multiple autoimmune diseases, their doctor doesn't recognize that new autoimmune disease as manifestation of gluten sensitivity. They just call it an autoimmune disease of idiopathic nature, meaning we don't know what causes it. Here's some immune suppressing medications to take for you. And that's what I'm not saying that you have a problem. I'm saying that if you keep doing it, you most likely will. If you fall within the statistical parameters of every other celiac patient that's ever been studied. So again, just trying to look out for you there. If you have Hashimoto's, is it almost certain you have gluten sensitivity? Yes and no. I mean, a lot of people with Hashimoto's have Hashimoto's because of gluten sensitivity. There's a lot of medical literature and research that supports that, but there are other triggers for Hashimoto's as well. So it doesn't mean that one with 100% certainty. Let's see here. Yeah, so Karen's asking, does it cause psoriasis and vitiligo? I have both. So yeah, we talked about both of those earlier, Karen. Maybe you hopped on late. You may want to watch the repeat of the show. How do I know if gluten-free oats are really safe? Cheryl, you might have hopped on late too. We talked about that. There's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. That's how you know they're not ever safe. So oats have gluten. If you're gluten sensitive and you're eating oats, you're gonna have problems that crop up on you. And that's, again, I encourage you to reevaluate that stance, because I've seen it in countless people where they were eating gluten-free oatmeal or gluten-free oat bars or gluten-free oat cereal. And what ends up happening is their inflammation comes back, or there's a name for people who go gluten-free in the traditional sense. So what happens is they go gluten-free, they feel better. They were diagnosed with celiac disease, so they cut out the wheat, the barley, and the rye. They go gluten-free, they feel better, but then they're eating the gluten-free pastas that have corn and rice and sorghum and other grains in them. And what happens is gluten-free whiplash. They develop a backpedaling of symptoms, and they start to divert again into an inflammatory state. And that's a very, very big and very, very real problem. As a matter of fact, some research studies show that 92% of all celiacs, when going on a traditional gluten-free diet, meaning wheat, barley, and rye-free, continue to have persistent villus atrophy and inflammation in the GI tract. Even though they don't feel bad, they continue to have the persistent GI damage when they get their follow-up biopsies. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Symptoms can be silent before they can be deadly. And that's the problem with gluten sensitivity and celiac disease as a whole. And as I said before, a celiac, a lot of times the diagnosis doesn't come for decades. People don't get a diagnosis until they're so sick and so distraught with disease that they finally end up finding a doctor who's actually even paying attention to look for symptoms of gluten sensitivity, because a lot of the diseases associated with gluten are not gastrointestinal in nature. They do not affect the GI tract. Some of them are neurological diseases. Gluten can affect the liver. It can affect your nerves. It can affect your skin. Gluten can affect the bones. It's been linked to osteoporosis. So again, it's not an issue of whether or not you're symptomatic as much as it's an issue of whether or not you've got either one, you got a celiac diagnosis, and so we know there's actual identifiable damage that has been identified, or two, you've been genetically tested appropriately, where you know if you eat gluten, your body is going to create an inflammatory response to try to help defend you from the gluten. So, okay. So gluten-free products are not good. That in a nutshell is pretty true. Are there gluten-free, grain-free products that can be used? Sure there are, and they're labeled gluten-free too. So I wouldn't make that a blanket statement. I would just say that gluten-free products with grain in them that are labeled gluten-free are not good. And any processed food item that's loaded with sugar and chemicals is not good for you, regardless of whether it contains grain. So again, general rule of thumb is, the whole premise here is when people go gluten-free, they don't go gluten-free because they want to restrict their diet. They go gluten-free because they're trying to improve their health. If you really want to improve your health, don't eat gluten-free junk food, because there are 3 laws in nutrition. And if you break them, you will pay the consequence. And whether you want to or whether you don't, you're going to pay the consequence. It's kind of like if you go underwater and try to breathe, you will choke or you will drown. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you 3 laws of nutrition, you cannot get healthy eating food that is not healthy, right? So if you're eating junk food, gluten-free food items, you're not going to get healthy, and you're not going to restore your already damaged body eating garbage. Rule number 2, don't eat what you're allergic to. That's specificity. The only way you figure that out is either you have an acute allergic reaction that you recognize directly and you remove that food from your diet, or you get your doctor to properly test you for all 7 pathways of delayed hypersensitivity response and acute reactants. And then rule number 3 is if you feel bad when you eat it, don't eat it. So that's what we call the common sense rule. And because not everything can be described or explained as a result of having an allergic response. Some people react to foods because they react to foods. There are a number of different reasons beyond the immune system that we see this happen. Intolerance is a big one. People with food intolerances generally don't digest those foods very well, and that can create symptoms and other things. So again, following those 3 rules is that's where you start. Okay. Looks like that's all the time we have for tonight. So those of you listening, if it's your first time to the Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain Show, make sure you're back next Monday. We're here every Monday evening at 6 p.m. live. You can tune in. Make sure you subscribe to our feeds to get updates, free updates, and free information about how you can improve your health. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/glutenology. You can find us on Facebook at Dr. Peter Osborne, DOCTOR Peter Osborne. You can find us on the web at glutenfreesociety.org. And again, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter there. We'll send you a gluten-free survival kit right away to get you started, get you the right help to get your diet straight and to get your body vibrant and moving in the right direction. So those of you who found value from tonight's show, make sure, do me a favor, because I take my time to be here with you. I'm going to ask you a favor in return. The only favor I ask is that you share this with as many people as you feel like it could help. In essence, if you have loved ones with autoimmune disease, if you've got loved ones who are struggling in their health and you feel like they could benefit from this show and you feel like they could benefit from the information that we're teaching on this show, please, please, please help me reach more people in the world. Help me by sharing this information with them, whether you share it on Facebook or YouTube or whether you share it through links and emails personally. Doesn't matter to me. Just want to make sure we're helping as many people as we can. Many of you already know what my ultimate mission in the world is. We're trying to help 100 million chronically sick people who have no answers and who have no medical solutions find real solutions. So please, please, please help me share this. And the way you do that is by hitting that button or taking the link and distributing to somebody who you love. So again, this is Dr. Osborne. I hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday. That's all for Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain tonight. Take care.